Hey, Rohini, how are you?
Good. How are you?
Which part of the world are you in right now?
I'm in Brooklyn and it's dreary outside. So, hoping for a better weekend.
Yeah, I was just talking to my colleague. He lives in downtown New York because he teaches at the Parsons School of Design.
Oh, you sure?
My niece lives in Brooklyn, so she goes up very frequently up and down. And she was like, the weather is awesome. But then she last week, I think college maybe shut down or something, or maybe they're done for the semester. She flew back to India. So she was saying the weather was perfect, and that meant she had to go to India.
Well, she's not missing much right now. We have a bit of a storm system going through.
Awesome. Give us a little bit of a 2 minute background just about yourself, your story arc, and your career arc.
Sure. So I, like you, I think have had a pretty nonlinear path through my career. I've worked in many different industries, everything from startups all the way to massive companies. I worked for Clorox. Most recently, I worked for NYU Langone Health. So most of my background is in consumer and health industries, so more regulated, as you would say. But that being said, there's a lot of sort of fascinating movement that happens within these industries, and they're much more attuned, I think, to the use of cutting edge technology tools with regards to marketing because they're much further ahead in terms of the complexity of marketing they deal with, right? So it was an unexpected learning once I got into the industry, and I've had a good run through it.
Tell me first off, is it you worked in non-regulated and also regulated industries? Is it that much different that you have to rethink the way you market?
Yes, I think so. So if you think about consumer products, for example, I worked with a chemicals company, right? Clorox. It makes all of your cleaning products. The level of regulation is very specific to the safety of the product in use, right? But not so much in terms of regulation with regards to marketing to a consumer, right? So you have the ability to have a really clear and deep understanding of who your consumers are, what their motivations for purchase, and what it sort of the meta of why they need to clean, right? All of that is easily found out information from the standpoint of traditional market research. So the regulation piece of this is more on the back end and making sure that the products themselves are safe and are being marketed to the right people for the right use in the right way that they can understand its use in an effective and safe manner versus, something like health, let's say. In the case of health, you're talking about the consumer themselves, the patient, being what you're regulating around. So, what exactly you're able to sell them, if you will, as
Mhm.
services, what information you have about them, the ability for you to keep their privacy and security of their personal information safe becomes paramount, right? Along with making sure that any service you sell to them first does no harm, but is of benefit to them. So there's a different level of complexity when dealing with that sort of regulation and speaking to your consumer in that market.
Yeah. How does how has marketing changed in the last 3 years, according to you, because of AI? How has go-to-market changed? Now, I'm assuming, of course, when you look at if you look at the LinkedIn world and the view of the world of LinkedIn, it seems as
Sure.
if nothing in marketing is working anymore for a lot of people. But what really that means, what they're trying to say is the things that worked in 2020 to 2022, especially during the pandemic, things
Sure.
such as build SDRs at scale, do mass emails, all of that stuff is not working as well anymore. But in the last 3 years, post past ChatGPT, excuse me, what has changed in your mind, both with marketing and go-to-market? How has the bar moved or risen or lowered because of AI?
So I would say that the degeneration of the traditional tools has been going on for longer than 3 years, right?
Yeah.
Mainly because the ability for a consumer to be able to get information has so broadened the scope of things they consider. right? So in the past, for example, if you had three things on shelf, you only found out about those three things because someone advertised on a traditional TV series, right? Now, if you have the internet and you have global access to things that are available, it has really decentralized the ability for you to make a concentrated pitch, right? There's
Yeah,
so many people who are listening, you don't know if you're hitting the right audience. Now, what AI has done has been both good and bad, in the sense that we're able to develop much more accurate and specific communications for individual consumers or patients. However, the flip side is just as easily your consumer or patient is able to also get very specialized information that they think is appropriate. Now, the problem you face is how do you convince them that your information is unbiased and
yeah,
in their best interest, right? When they have a similar slew of information to access and to negate anything that you might be telling them. So, how do you build trust? How do you build the concept of being a trusted source of information about a specific topic? So now it broadens, I think, what consumers are looking for brands to do, right? And to have a much more effective story about why you should be trusted in that space before you even get to telling them about what you want them to do.
yeah. Tell me something in that context. If you look at a large health system like the one that you worked at as well,
Mm-hmm.
are people able to, and this is just ignorance on my part, are people able to just go open up a browser, go to ChatGPT, do things, or are there a lot of restrictions that are put on them because of the way and the type of company they are?
Well, give me a little more context when you say are
Let's say
people
you're on the marketing team of a NYU Langone,
sure.
and the person wants to send an email campaign,
Mm-hmm.
and the email campaign goes out to, let's say, for discussion purposes, 50,000 people.
Right.
They want to create a good email campaign. And they just go to ChatGPT and say, "Hey, I'm going to create an email campaign to these kinds of people and give me an outline." By the way, 90% of Silicon Valley people do this. They just go to
I'm
ChatGPT
fair
and they
enough.
type that stuff. They give a lot of context and say, "Give me an email." And I wouldn't be surprised if 80% of them just cut, paste, send.
That is definitely very different, in a large health system. Probably because the liability is very different in a large health system. So when we talk about our patients, right, for someone like an NYU Langone Health, you're talking about a lot of specialized care being required, right? So
Mhm.
if someone has, say, a certain set of symptoms or certain risk factors, the way that we would know is based on our own, patient profiles, and therefore this would already be, protected information. On top of it, we always have gone through the process of not just writing technical information in very specific ways that, we hire so many science writers to be able to translate technical medical terms into day-to-day language that people can understand and not misinterpret.
Yeah,
And on top of it, you have to have clinical people pass that language to say, you're not saying anything out of the ordinary. Yes, this is accepted, reasonable, medical advice, or, to come in and see us if they have a certain set of symptoms. So you have so many checks and balances along the way because of the risk of
yeah.
someone reading and potentially doing what you want them to do as based on the email. You can't afford for that to be anything less than perfect.
Yeah. No, I think that was the interesting part to me, which is why I mentioned to you before the call, right? About three or four people in the last couple of weeks, which is a lot of people, message back all at the same time saying, "Hey, why aren't you talking about regulated industries in particular?" Because whether it's pharmaceutical or healthcare in a general term, or even other industries such as insurance, I don't have a lot of background in those industries, so I tend not to talk to a lot of people in those industries. So I'm actively trying to give them a little bit more time. So when I say time, I mean airtime to say, okay, the average person that I talk to, and remember, I told you at the beginning of this, the average person that I talk to is a startup or
Sure.
a technology company, executive or an individual contributor, engineer, marketing person,
Right.
growth person, and they're trying to do all kinds of things with pushing the boundaries of what you could do with AI. And then
Fair
when
enough.
you talk on the flip side to some of the other people, like insurance companies, I know three or four people in insurance. I spoke to one of the people in State Farm actually a couple of weeks ago, and they had them on the podcast. They're like, "Yeah, we don't use a lot of Chat GPT." And I was like,
Right.
"What? You can't do that right now?" They're like, "No, we're not allowed to do that. We can take it, we can put it in internal documents. Even that, some of the legal guys would complain, but
Right.
external, there's nothing we could use that is from there."
Correct. So with if you think about the Clorox company, like I said, there's a lot of regulation around, what's on the back of the tiny print of risks and how to use the product safely.
Yeah,
So anything that goes out in front of the consumer, especially when it comes to talking about a certain product or who it's aimed at, always goes through legal, right? Legal has to give you the final sign off on the language used before that even gets into market. At NYU Langone, there is definitely a legal check, but before that, clinical, expertise is employed to make sure that we're not saying anything um, untoward. So think of all of these regulated industries as basically downstream from the technology that you guys are creating and are definitely pushing the boundaries on. But we are the ones who kind of mediate between the application of that and the general consumer. And the risk is on us, right?
yeah,
To make
yeah,
sure that the consumer is
sure.
safe. So
Or
so
doesn't do something that you would not want them to do based on
we don't
little
have the
information.
option of just releasing a new version and saying we're updating the bugs in this when something goes wrong, right? So all of that has to be done beforehand before a product even hits or a communication even gets out to market. So the risk profile is very different with these markets. Now, having said that, like NYU Langone does employ AI and chat and their internal versions of this, right? As in the data that's fed into it is controlled. What is the kind of patient data that's fed is extremely controlled, so that there's always checks and balances to make sure that there's nothing untoward happening. So it's always within the guarded gates of protected information, and it's one that it takes a lot of priority, right? As in, if we're going to try something new, we need to make sure that we can recover from any risk of testing something here with this set of data. It's not anything that we can afford to just backtrack and go mea culpa. So yeah,
Yeah, no, I totally understand that portion of it.
yeah.
Let me ask you a different question then. In terms of growth, you were responsible and you were managing growth at
Hmm.
NYU Langone, right? What is that role different than maybe growth at a Clorox? How are those two roles different? Can you do things, for example, can you do analysis on, okay, here are the patients that came in to do X. They are more likely to want to be able to do Y. So we should target them. Can you do things like that, or are those things not allowed?
So we can do sort of analogous groups, right? We have a large enough database of patients that you're able to get a sense of what sort of broader general population equivalents would be doing. So we're
Yeah.
using them as proxies. So understanding what their needs are, understanding what their risk factors tend to be, what their behaviors and their lifestyles tend to be, gives us a way to speak to similar patients outside. But it's not done from the standpoint of their medical information. It's more about the usage of technology. So digital health services. What sort of messaging matters to you, or what sort of platforms are you using? What sort of health and wellness information are you interacting with? That's the kind of information we use to talk to them to build a sort of meta brand, right? Not even to the point of please come in and see XYZ, doctor.
Got it. So
More
if I
about
come in for a vaccine, you're
right.
not going to be able to say, hey, you took this vaccine, you should probably do this. But
No,
if I went to your website and clicked on these four pages and you found out that, oh, this person is searching for information related to Y, then that's ability
yeah,
for you to be able to go, got it, got it. Yeah,
right.
that makes a lot of sense. In terms
So,
of growth, what does growth mean in the context of NYU Langone then?
so for a large health system, and I think this would be fair for anyone, it's getting new patients through the door, right? So typically, when you have larger specialized health systems, big surprise, the highest users tend to be people who are older, who have more complex
Right.
disease.
Right.
But when you think about it from the standpoint of the life cycle of a patient, right? You don't wake up at 80 and go, you know what, I'm going to go see NYU Langone today. This is
Yeah.
something
Yeah.
that you over time have interacted with on different basis, right? When you were young, healthier, maybe when you had your child, maybe when you were taking care of your parents. And then over time, as you needed, you start coming in for your own specialized care,
Yeah.
right? So how do I build that life cycle for you? How do I understand what the right moments of interaction and touch points are in your health journey as an individual? So that's the kind of thing that I was focused on trying to have a better understanding of and to help inform who we speak to and how.
Got it. This was fascinating. I think it was the first conversation. I want to drill down more into it. I know you've got a hard stop as well, and we are at the 21-minute mark.
Sure.
I want to drill down more into the use of AI. How are people using AI? How are automations happening? How are people thinking about agents if they're thinking about agents? So I'm sure we'll have you on a follow-up meeting at some point in time. But Rohini, thank you so much for the time.
Of
I'm
course.
sure I'll follow up with you sometime and then looking forward to it.
Okay. Same here. Bye bye.